Hello and welcome back. It's David with Ural Motorcycles, and this week's video we're going to be continuing where we left off last time with the spare tire a couple videos back, where we took the spare tire and used it to replace a flat on the back. This time we're going to take the spare tire and replace it on the sidecar. Eventually we'll work all the way around the bike. So the first thing we're going to do is give ourselves a flat tire. I'll take out the valve stem here. And you may have noticed I'm running a Duro HF307 knobby. It's a little more cost effective than the hide nows that you typically see on Urals. But I've been running these, and I like them quite a bit. If you're interested in a set of these, definitely contact your dealer or service center. Okay, now that we've given ourselves a flat, we are going to set the parking brake and make sure the bike is in gear so it doesn't roll on you if you're on an incline and you're changing this on the road. Next, you're going to get your toolkit out. First thing you're going to want to do is get your spare wheel nut wrench and remove the spare wheel nut. And remove the tire from the holder on the trunk. Part of the reason I like to do this first is because it's a little bit less weight and the bike is more stable on all three wheels. Now, if you've seen any of my videos before, you know I usually show alternative ways of using things that are already on the bike to get a task done, like deploy the center stand, using the shovel, for example, as you may have seen in other videos. When it comes to the sidecar and lifting the sidecar up, there are other ways of doing it in an emergency. If you have nothing with you, for example, the jerry can be used. But the official position from Ural is get a scissor jack or a bottle jack and carry it with you in the trunk. It's part of the reason you have a sidecar is for a little bit extra storage. So that and maybe a socket set, like I've mentioned before as well, would definitely come in handy in times like this when you're on the side of the road. So in my bike, I actually carry a little scissor jack, very inexpensive, but very effective for cases like this. And the reason I don't really want to cover alternative ways of doing it in an emergency situation is because there's just too much risk and we don't want you getting hurt. So before you start lifting the sidecar off the ground with the jack, you're going to do a couple things first. Now, you can use the extension or some other tool that's in the toolkit and your little screwdriver. We're going to use the toolkit for everything we do here, just like I've done before, to show you that it can be done. But if you have other tools that you throw in your sidecar, as you get more experience, it'll just make this easier. So what I like to do is hold something up against here, up against the hub, and then it gives you a little bit of extra leverage, and you can pop the hubcap off instead of prying at it and potentially damaging the edge or something like that. So now that that's off, you can take your 17 millimeter wrench and you're going to break the bolts loose on the caliper. Once you have the bolts removed, you can reach down and lift the caliper off the rotor and place it gently on the other side of the swing arm when you're removing the caliper, be aware that there may be some caliper shims. So on my particular bike, there's the 2 bolts. On my bike, I've actually got 3 shims per bolt that I need to replace when I put the caliper back on so it's properly spaced against the rotor. Most bikes have none, but I've seen, you know, as few as 1 and as many as 3, like on this bike. Rarely are they much more than that. But so if you remove these, even if you don't know they're there, but you see them falling out when you remove the caliper, be sure and pick them all up and put them back where they came from when you reassemble it, so your rotor doesn't rub against the caliper and wear your brakes or heat the disc and warp it. Now with the screwdriver and the pliers that are in the toolkit, remove the cotter pin. I use the screwdriver to pry it away a little bit, and then the pliers to get it pushed through. Because we're pretending we're on the side of the road, you don't want to try and straighten this as much as you can, so you can put it back in, or you can carry a couple spares in your toolkit with your 27mm wrench. You can break this loose, and before you remove it completely, now you can jack up the bike. Slide the jack in a secure position under the frame. And get the bike up just high enough where the tire clears the ground. Now you can completely remove the nut. And remove the flat. Your Sidecar wheel assembly that you just removed, if you flip it around, you got this aluminum spacer, similar to the one that's on the back that holds the rotor. This one is a different size and shape and holds a different rotor. But you're going to have to put this on your spare. Now, the spare already comes with an adapter to just swap over the rotor for the rear, because that is the most common flat that you're going to get. Like, you'll notice that the rotor side is actually the spline side with the splined hub, or the splined shaft coupling. So you're going to want to remove this and put it on this hub. So you're going to first you'll remove your rubber plugs that protect the threads. And as I discussed on the last video, replacing the rear tire with the spare, you can use the Allen key from the toolkit. In this case, it's a 6mm, which is what these are. And then, as I've said before, you can use an extension, you can use a box end wrench, anything that will give you more leverage to get this broke. But what you're going to want to do is when you start to break these, you're going to press this in as much as possible when you break it loose, because you don't want to strip the head on the side of the road, because you will be stuck then. Now, if you were at home in your garage, you could heat these up a little bit, because there's Loctite on these. But on the side of the road, you just don't have that option unless you carry a torch with you, which is a possibility. That's for you to decide. So Go ahead and break these all loose. Once you've got these all loose and backed out, you can transfer all of this to your spare. Carefully get all the bolts lined up. Get each one started. And then you're going to go back and tighten them down. Now, a good comment from one of the last videos is somebody said I neglected to tighten them in a star pattern. You should always tighten them in a cross pattern so you evenly tighten the rotor and don't cause any unnecessary warping. And as I've mentioned before in the other video, when you get to a safe place, a garage, a repair center, whatever the case may be, you're going to want to Loctite these with a little blue Loctite and torque them to the proper specifications according to your owner's manual. With your torque handle, whatever you choose to use, go around in a cross pattern and tighten everything as much as you can. By hand. Remember, this is supposed to be a temporary fix until you can get to a place to make the proper repairs. There you go. So before you put on the spare wheel, I noticed when I was removing mine, this distance bushing, which is on two-wheel drive models, with the spline shaft, this little distance bushing goes on the shaft back in this little area here. Even in an emergency situation, you might want to scope it out, or when you get back to wherever you're repairing your motorcycle permanently, you want to make sure that these are not showing any signs of excessive wear. Sometimes with the side loads that the bike is doing, this, with the sidecar wheels standing straight up and down and not able to lean into the turns, these things will experience a lot of wear. Or if the castle nut on the axle is over tightened, it'll crush it back in there, and then as this thing is spinning around, it basically wears these down to nothing. And sometimes they'll have a big groove in them, whatever. So inspect this for wear anytime you change your tire or you're lubing your splines. It is a wear part, and over time, depending on how much you ride or how much cornering and abuse you put the machine through, these can wear. Now you are ready to take your prepared spare wheel. Even if you choose to leave the rear wheel adapter hub on, that's fine, because it's going on the outside now, and it will spin freely out there. It's not going to hurt anything. You just won't be able to put on your hubcap. Lift it up on the drive shaft and make sure that it engages with the splines. My bike doesn't have a washer out here. Depending on the year, it may have a little washer over the seal. Mine doesn't. You can see the spacer in there, the steel part of the spacer. The castle nut actually rides on that. Some years they put a washer, some years they didn't. If yours doesn't have a washer, don't be concerned. Just put back whatever came off your bike. Now you're going to replace your castle nut. Now, a word on the castle nut and the tightening of this. There's a lot of information out there on the internet about what to do, what not to do. Some people say you want to tighten it as much as possible hand tight. That's actually a good rule of thumb. So you can tighten it hand tight as you can get it. And then if there's no side-to-side play, what I do is I get it hand tight, and then I go until the hole lines up with the notches in the castle nut so I can get the cotter pin back in. If you have any side-to-side play, go ahead and go another flat of the nut until you eliminate that. If you do that every time, it's going to be tightened perfectly. Now, during periodic maintenance, because of the wear on the little bushing I talked about earlier, you're going to want to make sure that it doesn't get loose. So if you're riding around and you hear a little clunk or a knock, or you just happen to be putting air in your tires and you notice that the wheel is a little loose, take the cotter pin out, give it a little turn, and then every so often you're going to want to inspect that spacer on the back to make sure that that's not grooved down. Even though those are hardened, they do wear. So take your cotter pin. The same one I took out, I just straighten it with the pliers. Everybody's got their own way of doing it. Some people fold it over the front, some people fold it side to side. If it's a roadside repair, you're not going to be putting the hubcap back on anyway if you leave this adapter on, which I have done, so I won't be returning the hubcap. So you pretty much do it however locks the castle nut in place. At this point, you're ready to put your caliper back on the rotor. So you can just grab it from the back, slide it over the rotor. Now remember, mine had the 3 little washers on each bolt, so it's a little tricky. Usually if you get them started between the caliper ear where the bolt threads in and the mounting bracket, you can jiggle it around until it starts to go in. Once it does, just run it in loose and get the other one started. You don't want anything in tension. You want to give yourself as much room as possible. Now, if you're in your own garage doing this, one trick to getting them to stay is you can rub them with a little like white lithium grease or axle grease, and they'll stick together, and then you can just place them on the back of the caliper bracket. But obviously we're pretending we're on the side of the road, so we're making do with what we got. There we go. Okay, so now that that's started and they're finger tight up to the caliper bracket, now we can let the sidecar down. I like to put the little rubber plugs back in the holes before I put my flat on the spare wheel carrier, just so I know where these are later when I go to put everything back the way it was. Now you can return your spare to the spare wheel carrier. Spline side down. And tighten it up with your spare wheel nut wrench, making sure to press down so you don't strip this out. You don't want it to walk out of the little holes when you're tightening it. Now that the bike's back on the ground, you can go back and really give the caliper bolts a good snugging up without fear of wiggling the bike around and possibly knocking it off the stand or however you had it lifted up off the ground. And that pretty much wraps that up. Another successful spare tire swap, this time for the Sidecar. You're going to want to stow your tools, stow your jack if you have one. Don't forget your hubcap. Don't leave that on the side of the road. You're going to want to put that back when you swap these back to the stock configuration. So I hope you enjoyed that video. That wraps it up for this week. If you have any follow-up questions to this video or regarding any other topic or pertaining to your Ural motorcycle, you can always contact us at info@ural.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please give the post a like. I will link the other video, the first one I did with the spare tire in the rear position. I'll link that video. If you haven't seen it, you can go watch that one. And until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later.